we're going to talk about effective documentation contributions to open source projects, because I think that's where a lot of you here are. Um, I was in the process of mentioning that, let's see if slide advances, slide advances. Okay. Um, I had a non-traditional background myself. I helped other people with non-traditional backgrounds. And then I moved to a small island in a smallish town. And once I retired from tutoring, which was evenings, nights, weekends, all of a sudden I could get back involved with my hobby from my youth and school days, which was singing in choirs. So nothing fancy, just community choir. But the thing is, when you join an organization in a small town, it means that everybody there just knows how things work, except you, because you haven't lived there all your life. You don't know that this is just the way things are and how they always happened. So I needed to ask a lot of questions. Now, I brought some great skills. I was a very experienced singer. I had even directed choirs. I had organized them. I had marketed them. But I did not know what I was doing in this organization because I didn't know how they worked. So all the questions I asked, I thought, isn't this what any new person needs to ask? Shouldn't we have a record of this somewhere? And eventually I became the communications director for the Summerside Community Choir. I created welcome documents. I sent weekly emails with what we did last week and what to prepare for next week. And I used to say, I wish I could get paid for writing these choir emails because, trust me, they were pretty elaborate. They had tables of contents. They had exit points. So if you did not order a music folder this week, you can stop reading here. Otherwise, continue on. So they were pretty good, I want to say. And I did have some past experience just building very basic HTML and CSS websites. So something you'll also discover sometimes when you join an organization that is not big into documentation and maintenance is resources get stale, even if they have them. And what I've got on screen here, I'm not in that picture, so you don't need to bother looking for me. This is the website I inherited from them. And I don't know if you can see that it gives the Christmas concert dates on it. If you don't maintain that, then you're committing to having your Christmas concert at Trinity United December 19th every year. So they realized that they needed someone to maintain their documentation that they had, in this case, their website. And I was happy to do it, but this is really what snowballed and launched me into open source, because I didn't exactly like this website. I thought I could do better. I wanted to increase my, improve my own HTML and CSS skills. And then at the time, that took me into learning JavaScript and learning React. And then eventually I discovered, let's see if we're good here. Yeah, learn stuff, good. All right, now we're working, I learned all this stuff through Scrimba online. It was great. Then I discovered Astro because I was ready to remake this website. And so I popped in the community to learn, but I ended up sticking around. They were so welcoming. It was such a great place to be. And then I started answering support questions. And then I started, even me, submitting little fixes. This is my very first PR to Astro and my very first PR to open source. And it was a configuration file to get Astro running in Code Sandbox, which is actually how I code it most of the time. So, oh yeah, then the journey continues. Eventually, I was asked to join the project as a maintainer. And then later, even after that, I was hired to work as the docs lead, leading the entire documentation project. So now we come full circle, and this is perhaps the only time in my life that I am actually using my English degree professionally. So maybe I do kind of have a traditional background, but it was anything but a traditional path to get to this point. And Astro may have been the first open source project that I contributed to or interacted with. But that community choir and volunteering experience wasn't actually that much different than what you encounter in an open source project. I think, though, even though this was kind of a weird roundabout way to get into open source, the path to me has a theme to it. And that theme is a constant focus on helping people. And that's where documentation comes into play in open source. I strongly believe that the only reason to have documentation at all, its sole purpose, is to be helpful. And that's going to be a theme that's going to run through today as well. I mean, honestly, and it's going to run through your entire involvement with open source if you're doing it right. So let's talk about how Docs helps a project. Oh, this was supposed to be me at Astro. Okay, let's get into the reasons why open source projects need docs. First of all, it's so that people can use the project. And even before they do that, they need to figure out whether to use it, whether it's right for them. It has to answer questions like, what is this thing? What does it do? What doesn't it do? Who is it for? So this can take the form of getting started guides and tutorials where you'll have to really clearly spell out requirements. You'll have to explain setup and installation. This can also take the form of API reference documentation so people know exactly what methods and variables and features are available to them. It also takes the form of how-to guides and recipes. So what are the different things you can do with this project? What are the features? How do they work? What's a good path? What's a good way to accomplish something? But also, open source project needs docs so that people can contribute to the project, not just documentation about how this bit of it works or how you use it, but how it's built and how you build it. Open source projects need documentation about their project architecture and their testing suite. They need contributing guides. What's the process to contribute? Which tools are used? And even how to add docs for the thing that you contributed to the project. So you need docs. And then related, but separate, some projects will have this separated out. A lot of projects are doing double and triple duty on things. Documentation supports the UX writing. So these are the little messages that you'll find while using the project. It could be CLI tools like our Create Astro wizard that walks you through something. Trust me, we have spent so much time talking about the wording of the questions and the prompts as you walk through creating a new Astro project. These can be in-app pop-ups and hovers. These can be names of things, and these can include error messages as well. So many docs contributions might not be what you're expecting. When people think of contributing to docs, they imagine writing guides and tutorials, and you're sitting by candlelight, and you've got a cup of tea, and there's snow lightly falling out the window. But many, maybe even most of the contributions to docs are actually done by people who didn't even think they'd be contributing to docs. So let's say that you're contributing a code feature. In addition to the code that you submit, you need to document your contribution in a PR. You need a clear description of your contribution so the maintainers know what you're contributing. You also might be responsible for a changelog message that communicates to users how the project is different or what new features have been added because of your contribution. And we're all going to say right now, right? Nobody is going to write bug fixes and improvements for this message. You're all going to do better than that. Additionally, people need to know how to use what you built, why it's there, what they can do with it. If you contribute a feature, congratulations, you're also responsible for contributing docs. And in addition to explaining how your stuff works, you also need to think about, does the thing you contributed to the code, to some part of the project, does it enhance or even replace any existing feature? And therefore, does it enhance or replace any existing documentation somewhere else on the docs site? Does this change how someone uses the product? Are there existing code samples in the docs, explanations, or guidance that now need to be updated because they're out of date because of the thing you added to the project? And also, how will the next contributors know how to work with your code, how to maintain it, how to safely change it, how to update it, how to troubleshoot it and fix it when something goes wrong? So you may also need to provide code comments, tests, or write error messages to go along with what you thought was a code contribution. That process is also true if you commit something to the process of the entire open source project. It could be a GitHub action. You might now have to document this new tool that's available to contributors and maintainers, some kind of automated check. You might have to document how this fits in now to the process of contributing to the process. You might need to update a contributing guide. You might need to update a PR checklist or a template. You might have changed a governance process. That means you need to update the governance docs. So that's what I mean when I say that a lot of people contributing docs to an open source project never intended to commit docs and never thought they'd have to. Oh, yeah, there'll be slides. I said all these things. Lots of things. But so far, all these docs contributions have not been what we think of as contributing to docs in open source. And there was maybe some more stuff I was going to say here. Yeah, let's say it. Why not? So for those of you in the group who don't think of yourself as docs people, I mean, I don't know how what I just said makes you feel. This could be a what? I didn't sign up for this moment for you, but instead, I hope it actually makes you feel an affinity or an attachment or a relationship with docs, because you can see just how interwoven docs are with every single aspect of an open source project. Even when your intended contribution was a non-docs contribution. Now, with the nature of open source projects in particular, often being remote, distributed, communication, and especially async communication is critically important. And that's what docs are. So docs are a source of truth. Everyone can access them to find out what the heck happened, what's going on, what should have happened. Docs are how things work, and docs are where you go when you need help. So whatever you provide to a project, whatever form your contribution takes, the reason that you're doing it is to help. And it's hard to help anyone without docs. And so far, we've only talked about the accidental documentarian. What if docs are your main contribution? What if that's your dream? What if that's your jam? You're in like the docs cohort here. Your contributions to docs might not look like what you expected them to look like either. So maybe the person next to you with the code contribution wasn't expecting to do all this documentation work. But we've seen how just a simple change can snowball into required docs. But you're an intentional docs contributor. You didn't change the code. You didn't change a process. You didn't change a project. You didn't change how anything works or how anyone uses the project. Oh, a little slow. So why should the docs change? It's a question that we really have to ask ourselves. And it's a question that I, as a docs maintainer, ask whenever a community member submits a contribution to me. What do you want to change in the docs? What's your reason for changing the docs? How and why is your change helpful, and to whom? These are the questions you have to ask yourself when you want to contribute to an open source's project's docs. You don't have those built-in automatic requirements. You got to bring something to the table. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't contribute. It means that you didn't do anything that requires a change. So the responsibility, the extra responsibility is on you to communicate how this contribution helps the docs, help its readers. So there's some insight into the world of an open source docs maintainer. I am constantly juggling docs that should get written that contributors don't realize or think they need to do, and docs that get written at me that I need to figure out how or even whether they are helpful to me as a maintainer, to my project, and to my readers. Before that sounds too discouraging, um, there are lots of contributions to be made, and we're going to get into those right now. So you want to contribute to docs. You want to be helpful. What can you do? Many open source projects use labels to triage, prioritize, and categorize their issues and pull requests. AstroDocs does. You're seeing some of them on the screen right now. So before contributing to a project, look at their existing project labels to see if those can tell you what kinds of contributions they expect and are prepared to handle. I mean, if there's a label, they probably get a lot of them. They're ready for them. Every project will be different and may or may not use labels, but the examples here, I'll show you some of the main ones that are used frequently at AstroDocs. Add new content, improve existing content, typo lick, grammar quick fixes, a code snippet update because code does change and does get out of date, consistency or formatting, accessibility or internationalization, including translations, because we are extensively translated in our docs, or site improvement, because our open source project happens to be a website building framework. Our docs is an Astro site as well, and it needs all the same kind of regular maintenance that any website does. Okay, now in terms of using these labels, I want to talk about how we use them because it can kind of seem obvious if you don't think about it. I mean, yes, they identify and they categorize, but why does a project bother to do that? There are some real uses to us here. Labels help reviewers know what they're getting into when they open a PR. So our AstroDocs PR template even has a section on it for you to suggest from some of our labels which ones you think are appropriate for your project. And that's because labels are so helpful to us. We really use them all the time. That 3 minutes while the kettle is boiling, I can probably jump in, review, and finish a typo link, or grammar fix. But if I don't have a lot of time, I don't even think about opening up add new content. Also, these labels in our project are helpful to our translators who update the docs based on the PRs that are submitted to change the English documentation. So our system lets our translators know which pages in their language have changed and in English have changed and therefore need updating in their own language. But our system also shows them the PRs that prompted the change. So having access to that information is helpful for the translators to do the same thing. Could you imagine receiving a notification, page XYZ changed? Good luck figuring out what happened with it. So the part of our system too is to find the translators to help them know what kind of change they're looking for. Similarly, is their kettle boiling or do they have a lot of time? What are they prepared to do? And in particular, I'll call out two specific labels that we use. These are any GitHub project can go into labels and you can make any label you want. I don't know how well you can see the screen. If you could zoom in on some of these, you will see there are also labels like can of worms. These are bigger than they appear. These indicate that there's more docs work needed. So these are not standard labels. This is what AstroDocs uses. I get to make them up as I go. So there are two that I made up that are the most helpful for me. Other projects might not differentiate or distinguish between these two that I'm going to show you. Every project works differently, but our labels are kind of a documentation of our docs project itself. They exist to help you communicate and collaborate effectively with us. So that's why I've chosen two, and I'm going to show you the difference between them. And it's the top two on the screen there. It's add new content versus improve existing documentation. So for us, add new content. This is something new, never been documented before. So it requires checking that putting something new into the docs doesn't have these ripple effects and change other pages. For example, if we've added a new third option for a configuration value, we have to go back and check throughout the docs for any place where we might have said, choose one of the two values. So knowing that something is new is extremely important to us. That's our sign to look carefully for broader effects. The second label that we use often is improve existing documentation. So we use this label when the nature of the change is basically, improving is refining some existing content. It could be rewriting for clarity. It could be adding an extra example or edge case of the same thing that's being described. We still treat these as pretty significant content changes, and they're going to need editing and testing, but they're less likely to affect other areas of the docs. So the intention here is that we're simply making a self-contained bit of the documentation a little bit better, or with any luck, not worse than it was before. So having these two labels is helpful to me as a docs maintainer and as a docs lead who coordinates the efforts of other docs maintainers so that we all think about and get on the same page, whether something is self-contained or whether we got to go spelunking and exploring a little more. We can also better signify to reviewers and translators how significant of a change this is and what to expect when they open it up. Now, you can also learn a lot about the open source project you're thinking of contributing to by looking at which labels are not on this list. For example, in AstroDocs, you will not see a label for content restructuring, sidebar reorganizing, design and typography, entirely changing a writing style convention. These are all important aspects of a documentation site, and they're something we do pay attention to. And there are even changes that we do make ourselves but are typically not contributions that you can walk in off the street as a new contributor and make to a project. These are the kinds of deep and structural decisions that may be handled by a core team of experienced, long-standing contributors who are very familiar with the docs and its history. And I mean, even if you do bring advanced information architecture skills to the table, and information architecture means you probably have experience in designing content so that it's discoverable and the site flows well and it's easy to get from one place to another. You know how to design for the reader's journey. But these types of changes are often big and disruptive, and they may not be aligned with the project maintainer's plans or wishes. Also, we got to be real here. The project you're contributing to doesn't know you. You haven't yet earned any trust or established a relationship. Open source projects get a ton of drive-by, one-time contributors, and a project simply doesn't know whether you'll be around for the length of time it requires to enact a larger docs change, let alone to help maintain these changes that you've proposed. And you certainly haven't been around to experience the history of a project and the events and discussions that led to the current decisions. And you don't know what's already been proposed and rejected, sometimes multiple times. But again, every project is different. Maybe a missing label is an opportunity. Maybe they've just never had a contribution like that, but would like one. For a project without strong docs leadership, the past choices that have led to the current state may not have been intentional, just simply how things evolved over time. So the best way to find out is to ask. You may think you found a project that needs your help, but it's still important to consider your proposed changes' value to the project, its maintainers, and its users. Have they expressed difficulty or dissatisfaction with the thing you're changing in their current docs? Have their readers expressed dissatisfaction? Are the benefits that your change brings something that the project prioritizes or even cares about? Does the project have the resources to undertake the change you're proposing? These are all things to consider in a community that you don't know, where you want to help, they want help, but it's a matter of finding the proper match. Docs are best served by addressing actual expressed pain points by its maintainers and by its community. If you haven't hit a pain point, your contribution might not be accepted, not because it's bad or low quality writing, but because it's low quality helping for the project and its users. And it could just even not be appropriate at this time. There's all kinds of reasons why finding a match is really important to making a helpful open source contribution. Oh yes, my favorite line. How could I stumble on this one? Because we we have a saying in AstroDocs when we close a PR that we decide we can't accept. And that thing that we say is, hey, that would make a great blog post. Because not everything that is cool or that is true belongs in a project's official documentation. But nothing stops you from writing about it. And that's still helpful. It's helpful at Astro to have people writing about Astro on their blogs and to have them sharing it on social media and with our community. And we even have a spot in our docs to link to this external content for stuff that doesn't really go in docs, but we still think could be helpful and useful to our community. Some content is just too niche to go in docs. And as a personal example, myself, the docs lead, I have written a guide to starting a new Astro project or Starlight project in Gitpod. And it's on my personal website. Even though I am an Astro core maintainer and I'm a Gitpod community hero, and I'm very involved with these two communities, this thing that I wrote doesn't belong in either project's official documentation. So a rejection is a rejection for the needs of the project at that moment in time. It's not an indication of quality or of low effort. We are not judging you that way when we have to reject a contribution. When you do contribute to a docs project, you need to be satisfying a need of theirs. And again, every project is different, and every project makes their content decisions differently. But you should know that they do make these decisions, whatever they may be. And if you want to help them, you have to contribute in ways that make sense to them. So we've talked about using labels to scout the kinds of contributions that you can make. Now let's talk about identifying an open source project needs. Because we said, first thing you got to do is identify a need. So how do we do that? Because if you haven't identified a project need, why are you sending them a contribution? Who is your change or contribution helping? And what is that change or contribution helping the doc's reader do or achieve or accomplish? Now, that doesn't mean you need to show up with some kind of grand gesture. In fact, it's usually quite the opposite. I think I have another slide for that. I do. Just like it takes two people to have a conversation, it takes two parties to contribute. If we compare two kinds of contributions, fixing a typo improves the experience for the doc's reader. It improves the readability, the accuracy, the credibility of the docs. Instant win from me. I hate typos, not just as a sign of sloppiness, but because they distract the reader and take them out of their flow, right? The reader should be able to just get the information they need, not notice things, right? That is a doc's fail. So typo fixes, little tiny grammar fixes, immensely helpful to an open source project. It helps my project earn the trust that the entirety of my docs are correct and well maintained. If I can't get the spelling right, how can they be confident that I've got my code samples right? Now, contrast this with another contribution, such as, I'm going to rewrite this entire page because I think I can make it sound better. Or, I want to practice. So here, let me contribute an entirely new page. So in a situation like this, there is a time and a place, but especially if you're not an established member of the community or the project already, what I see as a docs maintainer is no new content or information for my reader. You haven't brought an extra piece of the puzzle to them. Your way may be fine, even great. Is it objectively better, or is it just the way you would say it? And then even if it's exceptional, is it in keeping with the style of the rest of the docs? Is the entire thing you contributed, word for word, exactly as written, is that significantly better than what was there before? Or more likely, does it require time and effort to edit and incorporate into the rest of the docs? Has one small tweak changed or lost a subtle nuance? Or have you replaced a standard phrase that we use every other page with something you think sounds better, but now all of a sudden is confusing for the reader because it's not our standard vocabulary? And believe me, there is some standard vocabulary out there, 4 standard processes that if I got to name them, I would not name them that way. I don't like the names, but if I don't want to confuse people, I need to adhere to certain standards. So a lot of this so far has talked about knowing your community. So getting involved with an open source project, long before I touched the docs, I joined Astro to learn the project, learn how to use the product, and then to answer back in support threads and help people. Getting involved with the community is a great way to discover what these needs are. You will hear the pain points. You will hear what people are complaining about with the product and with the docs. So given all that, all right, you want to help. You do want to help, and contributing is everything to open source. So even if you haven't yet spotted that typo to fix to get your foot in the door, there may still be places where you can really help, even without knowing the project super, super well. So I do want to give some ideas for you to get started here. The first thing is looking through existing issues, and this could be capital I issues, in a GitHub repo, there's a place for that. This is where members of the community have identified some kind of problem. Most repositories for code have a good first issue label that you can snag. AstroDocs also has, in addition, we have a help wanted label, because not every issue that we would like our community to jump in and help us with, not all of them are actually good first time issues. And we want to make sure people are aware of when we are happy to receive the help. The second thing you can do is familiarize yourself with the community's support questions wherever they happen to show up. That could be Discord, that could be on social media, that could be Stack Overflow, that could be Reddit. Use these support questions that the community is asking as a chance to look up the answer in the docs. So first of all, yeah, you'd be surprised how many people just don't go to the docs at first, and maybe the answer is right there. This is a way to familiarize yourself with the project and the docs, and is a good first step to becoming a more traditional contributor. And in the meantime, you're answering somebody's question for them. You're helping them. And if you do that regularly enough, I guarantee you will find a typo. I do not think AstroDocs has fixed all its typos yet. So they're in there. Please find them. And then when you do find that answer in docs, so someone's asked a question, you're going to go look it up in docs. You found it. Share that answer as a link. That is super helpful. You have contributed to docs. What you have done is you have shown that person who needed help, Astro's docs are reliable. You have a question, AstroDocs has an answer for them. I love when people in the Discord in Astro ask a question and someone else drops a link to the docs. That is validating for me. That tells me I did something good. I was ready for them. And it shows the person asking they can trust the docs. I think it was not 3 days ago that someone came in and asked a question, and I answered, and they said, "Is this supported? Is this a good use case?" And I said, "Well, here's the link to it in docs. Like, we don't document things that we don't think you're going to be successful with. If we put it in there, yeah, it's supported, it's recommended." And that surprised him. He said, "I've been burned by docs. I don't expect that level of thinking about the documentation." So I want people to use our docs. That's why we write them. I want you to help instill that confidence in AstroDocs. So share the links, listen for questions, look up the answers yourself, get familiar not only with the product, but how we write, how our docs style is, all that kind of things. And then there's a couple of things you can do as well. When you see these questions being asked over and over again, and there isn't an answer in the docs, this is something a docs project wants to know. This is something we want to know. Figure out which questions are being asked that you cannot answer with a link in Docs, and let Docs know. You can file an issue. In our case, you can chat in our Docs channel in Discord. That is feedback that is helpful to us, to our Docs project. Another thing related to that is you can shadow the people who are answering the support questions. And we just have amazing, helpful contributors in the AstroDocs Discord, and people ask a question and they will help. They will answer. They'll provide great code samples. They'll correct. They'll say, oh, no, don't do this. Do this here. They'll lay it out. Here's how you want to do it. If that's not in Docs, snag it and tell us it should be in Docs, because often people are too busy answering questions in support to be able to actually make the documentation. And so we use these kinds of scouts in AstroDocs to provide that go-between and share the load of helping. These are all great ways of contributing to a Docs project. Another thing you can do, look at me keeping up with my slides. I'm very proud of myself. Is you can follow their getting started guides or tutorials as a newbie or as someone without a lot of experience in the area. You can make sure all the examples work, and that if you follow the steps to the letter, you are successful. You get where you expect to be. Correcting inaccuracies, especially in a getting started guide, is crucial maintenance work for Docs. And this is stuff that can easily get out of date over time. Especially in getting started Docs, there's always the risk that you're explaining too much of a process that might change, or that you're being super specific. So for us, we have this little Create Astro Wizard, a command line app that runs to create a new project. And we are constantly debating between, do we do a super friendly, like first you'll be asked this question and then you'll be asked this question. But then when that wizard changes, our documentation is out of date. The flip side is your getting started guide could be open and run the wizard. Congratulations, new project. So it's always a balance there, and things are always changing because we're making the project better. So these people's first experience with the project are so important that we really prioritize our beginner education and documentation. The other thing you can do when you run through code samples in the docs, when you try some of the recipes and guides to add something yourself, you can note any friction or obstacles that you had along the way. So that kind of reporting is also super helpful to docs because we want to know if we missed a step. One thing, when people contribute instructions to our docs, one thing I often have to watch for is they'll give you a step 1, step 2, then they'll be here and they'll be saying, okay, so you should have done this up here, and then now you can do this. So there's a lot of fine tuning that goes into creating instructions that are super linear, where you haven't remembered something down here, you should have told them up here. So following these instructions and making a note of a friction journal is super helpful. For anything that did seem confusing as you walked through, again, search docs and see if someone who might have had the same experience can do the same, can go look up in docs and get unconfused about that. One issue that you will find in docs is that introductory material is meant to be introductory. It's not made to make you an expert right away. In fact, it's totally expected that sometimes you're just copying and pasting stuff to get to a successful outcome. But what introductory tutorials can do is give you a vocabulary and a context and a confidence for searching the rest of the docs. So we're not asking you to check that by the end of the introductory tutorial, you know everything about how Astro works. But we do take feedback about what was the reader's journey like, and are they now in a position to use the rest of our docs, which in an open source project can get much more technical or involved. So many things. The last thing that I'm putting on this slide is you can participate in translations. As a project maintainer, I want as many people as possible to be able to learn about and understand my project. And translated pages have typos too. So you don't need to come in and translate an entire new page. Send tiny fixes because maintaining translations is more difficult for a project than getting someone who has a burst of energy and decides to all at once translate a single page. If they leave and things change, those pages need maintenance over time. So much of our PR activity at Astro is small translation updates that compensate for every new feature we made, every correction we made, every improvement we made. Every one English PR to the docs for like 10 PRs in the different languages. That is, and we adore our translators and are so thankful for the work that they put into keeping our docs up to date. All right, so now you've identified a project's need and you have some things concretely you think you can do to contribute to an open source project. So some tips for helpful contributing. As I just said, we get a lot of small contributions and that's the way we like it. Earn trust with small contributions. As a docs maintainer, I want to avoid minor mistakes like the typos and the broken links. Like no fix is too small. It's you just until you've been there, you can't really understand. I'm always amazed and humbled and grateful that someone I don't know would go through the effort it takes to make a pull request, go through the whole GitHub system just to fix a single word that they read in the docs. You will send positive vibes out into the universe to that entire project, and you will make a great first impression. No, really, make more smaller contributions. Small PRs are easier to review. Don't combine multiple unrelated changes in one PR. This makes a PR super difficult to triage. So some projects, like ours, may have different maintainers who actually review different kinds of PRs. As I said, Astro Docs is an Astro website. So we have some people who review the code for the website itself. We have some people who review the content. We have some people who review the accessibility of components in our code. And if you combine a CSS change with a typo fix with a translation, you might need 3 different project maintainers to all have the time to review your PR before it can be merged. And then if it is merged, think of the poor translator who has to figure out what the heck happened in this PR to know how to update their language files. So don't change 30 files in one PR. Find and replace might be easy for you, but I have to meticulously review every single change, not just in the code, but then navigate to the other page in the deploy preview and scroll down and check that it worked. I will put off looking at this PR as long as I can. And there are Astro people here and they will confirm that. And if it becomes particularly burdensome, and if it's not a super helpful change, I will close it saying that we can't accept PRs like this. Another thing is to file an issue if you're not 100% sure that your contribution might be wanted. So while most projects will gladly accept a PR for a typo fix, other times it's not as clear that what you want to propose, what you think is a project need, is actually the project's need. So an issue is a way of letting a project know anything, that there's something wrong, that there's something confusing, that there's something missing. And issues allow other members of the community to chime in and add their voice, either confirming that, yeah, they see the same thing, or saying, no, it works for me. This takes the pressure off an open source maintainer to look at your contribution and go, I got to decide, accept or reject. And instead, it's a more communal process because I don't like closing PRs, but I can't accept all of them. But if you have filed an issue, then we can discuss. And in fact, maybe what you've identified is a real issue, but the solution that you would have contributed isn't the right one. When you can have community discussion in these issues, that can often lead to better solutions and ones then that you can feel confident contributing and know that you basically have pre-approval. And write helpful PR descriptions. Clearly describe the change that you're proposing and why it's needed or helpful. As I said at the beginning, it's not obvious to me. You didn't change anything in the project. I have to be told why my docs need to change. Follow the PR template if there is one. Many projects have one. Give all the information that's asked for. That's why we ask for it. Projects rely on this information so they can more easily triage and evaluate the contribution. In our case, we'll use it to add our labels, which we love. And remember that maintainers are people too. You are communicating to another human. Use the description to be friendly and kind and respectful. We thank and we show our gratitude in our PR comments to people who take the time to propose changes because it is a big deal and we really do want them. So similarly, remember that your contribution to change something in the docs that is not a required change it may come across as criticizing someone's prior work, maybe even the person reviewing your PR. So it goes a long way to just soften that by proposing your changes respectfully and gracefully. You can also check to see if there's a stated process for working on issues. Um, some projects, like GitLab is one of them, some projects expect you to put your hand up and say, please assign me this issue. Some projects don't do that. We happen to not do that. We happen to ask you to please only choose issues that have already been labeled as help wanted. Because remember, that issue inbox, it is a public inbox. Anybody can throw an issue there. And sometimes we have cases where someone files an issue, well-meaning contributor jumps in and says, here, I fixed it, but the project hasn't even decided yet that that is an issue that we prioritize or that we're looking at this time. So it's important to learn the contributing procedure. So now you've got something to contribute. You've discussed it in an issue. You know, yes, this will be welcome. This will be helpful. You're at the home stretch. You're getting ready to actually help here. You will need to figure out a project's procedure. Where are the docs kept? How do you access and edit content? Very first thing you should look for is a contributing.md. Almost all project repositories have one. Some may have more guides than that. But this is usually the first place you're going to go and look. You'll need to know which file formats are used. Are there certain documentation systems, platforms, conventions that you'll need to use? And at AstroDocs, we got you covered for that. We have AstroDocs. We have an entire Astro Starlight website. Starlight is our documentation framework at Astro. We have an entire website of guides showing you how to contribute to Astro's docs. And in fact, there's lots of guides how to contribute to open source in general, how to make your first PR, all this stuff here. We're docs people. Of course, we're going to document how you should document. So this is also a great resource that I do recommend checking out for getting involved in open source. We really try to have a lot of resources there so that you can feel comfortable contributing. And so here's a fun fact. This is my most recent open source contribution to a project that I do not maintain. And what did I do? I filed an issue. I said, and not only did I file an issue, I filed an issue about their contributing guide. I said, I think I can give an extra way of contributing here that is easier for people who just want to do it through the website and don't want to fork and clone the whole repo and maintain a thing. So I followed my own advice and I filed an issue and I waited for confirmation. And then I edited contributing.md. So this, even though I have an entire docs website open source that I'm managing, yes, I'm also making contributions when I can to other projects because open source is all about contributing. Ah, now, so dare I look at my watch? I think we've been going like almost an hour. And we've been talking a lot about contributing to open source documentation, and we haven't said a single word about writing. And maybe it's a good thing I can't see the chat. I don't know how many of you are going like, what even is all this? This is not what I was expecting. Well, we've talked about writing what the project needs, but we just haven't talked about writing how the project needs yet. And the reason that we've front loaded with so many other important things is that there are lots of resources out there with writing tips, how to improve your writing. But all that really matters, if you're contributing to open source documentation, is to keep the perspective of being helpful. That's what really matters when contributing to open source documentation. And when you're contributing to a certain particular project, what matters is writing to their particular style and conventions. So you'll consult the style or writing guides for the project if they have one. If they care, like if they're going to enforce things need to be written like this, then they're a docs project. They probably wrote that down. We wrote that down. And while they're generally similar, these rules can vary from project to project. If a project does not have a style guide or a writing guide, you can look them up online. There are lots of them. And even though the project you want to contribute to may not use the specific choices laid out, if you compare a few of these, you'll see what kinds of things tend to be in there. And in fact, because I know much of the advice, if you look at how to write a writing or style guide, as I have done, one of the most consistent pieces of information is to link to the Google Developer Guide anyway. Like everybody's using the same stuff. So looking at style and writing guides in general can give you an idea of what you should have in mind when you write. And if a project has their own guides, then follow them. That's a respectful thing to do. And that's why I think a writing guide is more important than a style guide, right? Every project is going to say, write in a friendly but not too casual tone. Like we have kind of converged on a real doc style in general, but when you check a project's writing guide, they will tell you how they abbreviate the word example. Do they use E.G. or do they use EX dot, EX without a dot? And honestly, in Astro docs, we reserve most of that stuff for what we call, so we got another guide. We have our editing guide. That's for our PR reviewers, because I don't expect every contributor who shows up to know how we format our bullet points. But those reviewing our PRs can consult that as a source of truth. And I think it makes a heck of a lot more sense to have reviewers correct that kind of stuff rather than expect contributors who are all excited and want to help to have to go through a list of very arbitrary punctuation or style issues. As a project maintainer, I don't expect you to know all that, but if I have laid out some for you, I do expect that you've taken a look at that, because the ones that I've bothered to give you, I do really care about. You know, and really, a lot of this can boil down to looking at what's already there. So ideally, if you're contributing to a docs project, you're familiar with the docs. If it's something in a GitHub repo like ours is, if it's docs in code and you open it up and you see the markdown code, the MDX code underneath, just follow the same format as the other examples you're seeing. You know, do they follow the one sentence per line convention? You'll see that in the code. Do all the headings use the gerund tense with the ing, installing Astro, fetching data? You'll see that if you're in their docs. And then just do the same thing. That's my writing tip. Look at what they're doing, do the same thing. And for the deeper language and style and tone and stuff, well, I mean, you're only making a very small first-time contribution anyway, right? So we're not going to get into these add a bunch of new content things right away. You'll have time to learn the docs process for that. So I've said this a lot, but the only reason that docs exist is to help the reader. So anything you write should be written entirely for the reader. And I think, yes, doing so well here. You have to write for the reader and consider the reader's perspective. This is having reader empathy. Just like your docs contributions need to help the docs itself fulfill one of its own needs, your contribution also has to help a reader fulfill one of their needs to do or learn something. We spend a lot of time about helping and fulfilling needs, and I thought this was supposed to be about writing, but that's what docs writing is. At the end of the day, two spaces after a period or ending a sentence with a preposition when it, feels more natural. Docs is just responsible for people being successful with an open source project. And all of the rules for good writing actually come from what is ultimately helpful to the reader, who might be busy, stressed, rushed, under pressure, sleepy, anxious, lacking in confidence, frustrated, working in their second or third or fourth language. And that's where these grammar rules, these language guidelines that you'll see, that's where they come from. That's why we keep it short. That's why we try not to use too much jargon. That's why we don't use cultural references or a lot of humor that might miss. That's why we use just direct, simple, plain language. And that's why we use bullet points and section headings to break up chunks of text visually so that we don't have this wall of text and people get overwhelmed. Writing something that's going to clearly and quickly tell a reader what they need to know is more important than all the grammar lessons in the world. And we're wrapping up the writing here with some maybe counterintuitive writing tips. Being direct is not impolite. Add, copy, remove. These are helpful words. This is a helpful verb tense. When I tutored math for almost 20 years, and the best thing I could do is just be confident when they were not confident. Seeing me confident and sure that everything was going to be fine, that's what made my students feel comfortable. That's what makes your readers feel comfortable. What do I have to do next? Copy this line of code. Okay, got it. That's what they want. You are telling them to do something. This is the appropriate verb tense for that. That's what it's for. You don't need to motivate or cheerlead. Your reader is already motivated. They have a problem. They have something they need to do. They have something they need to learn. They just want the docs to tell them what that is. To do X, first do A, then do B, then C. You don't need to get them excited about it or assure them that it's okay. And describing things as easy or simple can be discouraging when someone does not find it easy or simple. It'll be okay, you can do it. Might get a positive reaction from some people, some of the time, in certain moods, but it also risks appearing childish. And some will just find it annoying. And the same goes for a lot of humor. I will say, I give that piece of advice in another talk that I do about maintaining your own documentation. And I say, you should love that. That should make you happy because you don't have to write jokes. You don't have to, you don't have to write all these other words. You're allowed to just say, to install this, do this. Um, these are liberating rules. These are not like, this is not like rule police here. This is to make your contributions easier to write. Next, something that people do struggle with is that not everything that is true belongs in docs. And we talked about that before, about my guide, my personal site. Um, we stick to keeping readers on a happy path. And sometimes that means concealing information. Sometimes that means only giving them the most straightforward, the thing that's going to have the greatest chance of working. We can't explain every niche or edge case. Not everything that is true belongs in docs. But not everything that is not true belongs in docs as well. So when possible, stick to documenting what the product does and how it does work, not what it does not do. Because you know what? There's a lot of things it does not do. It does not cook your dinner and it does not clean your apartment. So do we say that too? Like, where do we draw the line? If you start saying what it doesn't do in addition to what it does do, you create this gray zone of confusion for the things you didn't mention, and now the reader doesn't know. But if you stick to only saying what it does do, then they at least have a reasonable chance of assuming that, well, if they didn't say it, I guess it doesn't do it. And then the last counterintuitive tip, and we are getting close to the end here, unhelpful docs are worse than no docs. Most projects can probably improve their docs right now by deleting, not by writing more. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go gutting other people's content on them, but it's a helpful mentality to have in your own writing. Delete polite and indirect phrases and wishy-washy, confusing verbs or verb tenses, should, would. Just be direct. And when I give a talk to project maintainers, like, I tell them straight up, delete content that's unmaintained and that's wrong. It's doing you more harm than having incorrect content in your docs. Even if you can't replace them yet, even if you can't fix them and write the new thing, if it's wrong, delete it. If it's super important, then someone will PR it. They will file an issue. They will tell you what needs adding back, and then you can do it properly at that time. I encourage open source projects, if their docs are a mess and they have like ill-organized pages and contents in a few different places, I say, you know what? Delete it all, one big page. Control F is a reader's friend. And instead of putting information in a bunch of places they can't find it, if it's all on one page, at least they know where to go, and you can improve it over time. So again, these fall under the do not do this to someone else's project, but this is advice that I give project maintainers, and it's good writing advice as well. So if you want to think of yourself, if you want to improve documentation, basically, I think the recurring theme here is just think of yourself as a helper, someone who happens to be helping in writing. Helpers don't need to entertain or write beautiful stories. They need clear and correct information available in a way that instills trust and makes readers feel confident and supported. And the best help for readers is contextual. It is for a particular reader who is trying to do something specific. And they can't get overwhelmed. So you have to protect the reader from extraneous information that might interrupt their flow. And that's where typos come in, but that's where over-explaining comes in. That's where too much information or this one weird edge case comes in. Never forget, too, that even though the reader is in your docs to get help, they may not be in that greatest state to receive help. And that's part of not overwhelming them as well. Yeah, so your writing is meant to be used, not appreciated as art. And it's meant to be used efficiently with the least amount of friction. So jokes, friction. Pop culture references, friction. Clever phrases, friction. Trust me, I've written some bangers. I've written some beautiful, lovely, artistic phrases that I have stricken from the record because they delighted me more than they helped other people. But also typos, friction. Missing or nonlinear steps, friction. Huge walls of text, friction. Burying the lead, putting the important stuff lower, friction. Because at the end of the day, the way that you've truly helped someone is if you've helped them get out of docs and get back to using the open source project itself, back to their own project. And that is the last slide. And I mostly kept up. So that's, thank you. Yeah, and I will wait for Ramon to come back in, and then I think I can switch up like what I'm seeing. I think I can pop in chat. Thank you so much for going through that all with me. And I'm excited to see what happens next.
Amazing. Sarah, thank you so much. That was incredible. Can I please ask a favor of the chat? Could we all show our appreciation for Sarah, please, in the form of emojis, be them claps, be them hearts, your choice, please. Let's give Sarah all the appreciation she deserves because wow, that was incredible. and I'll highlight those comments as we go, Sarah, because this was fantastic. We got Arthur saying, thank you, Sarah. That was amazing content. Jennifer saying, hey, that was excellent. It's been fantastic, and I'm so thankful. Oh, PSD over here says, awesome presentation. We got a clap coming from Otter Lord Plays. This was great. Thank you so much. We got a question. I think that's the question for me. I'll answer real quick. Am I in Astro Lounge? Is that the Discord channel?
Yes, that's the Discord channel.
I am indeed in there, and I'm gonna have to hop in and say hi to y'all. Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you. Sarah, how are you feeling? Do you wanna take a couple of questions?
I would love to take questions. That's the easy part for me.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you so much. Let's hop right in. I've bookmarked a couple here from the chat. I'm going to start with this question from Arthur saying, hey, how do you map content that needs to be updated when something in the project has changed?
So that's a great question. And in fact, I'm doing a lot of prep work for Astro docs, specifically on how to document change, because there's a lot to consider with change. So we are fortunate that Astro Docs is a website, a repository kept in GitHub. Find all is your friend. So when something is updated, when there's a new configuration reference. So one thing that we had recently, Astro, you can have a statically generated site or a server rendered site on demand. And then at one point we had server rendering B. We had two options there. So as I said before, there were lots of places where we just said, oh, so if your site uses server mode, and then once we had that second server mode, that hybrid mode come in, there were a lot of docs that needed updated. So for us, it was a lot of find, okay, where have we said server? And now we need to say server and hybrid, or we need to change the wording around. And in fact, so for change documentation, one thing we do at Astro is every Thursday, we have something in our Discord called Talking and Docking. We have live stream where our docs team, we're just working on docs. Anyone's welcome to come in to participate. Often I will open up the docs code base in a shared code, either a GitHub code space or a Gitpod workspace. And like we have 10, 12 people in the code at the same time. And I purposely leave updating docs like this when we have a lot of like changes for that time. And I say, everybody jump in the code space, and we all say, who's taking which page? And then we're all swarming on it. So that's something that we do. It's change management is difficult. So one strategy is try to get everybody excited about it and involved so that you can do it all at once, because it's a difficult thing to update incrementally as well. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I also wanted to highlight, because you mentioned talking and docking. I've dropped a link to the Discord channel for Astro Lounge. So if y'all want to join, in fact, for my folks over at on the Open Source Explorers program, next week, if I'm not mistaken, we'll be having a special talking and docking where we'll invite all of you to join as well. So I'm going to drop that into the calendar for that program as well. So don't miss that. It is optional, but I highly encourage you to come. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to bring in the next question. Oh, I actually wanted to highlight a point by PSD, who said, when you were talking about losing trust in documentation, PSD here mentions, I've read papers about a plant where the authors didn't write the plant's name correctly. Instantly lost all trust in the data, even if the experiment was super, super sound. So,
I mean, how do you know, right? Like,
exactly.
I can't. You got to trust my docs. So we gotta do everything we can.
Amazing. Great. Got another question from Arthur, asking, how do I engage people to contribute with documentation?
You know, people do ask us this because we have immensely active and engaged docs contributors, and it's hard. Like, I don't know if we just stumbled on something, but what I can tell you is, first of all, the open source project itself values docs. Not every open source project will hire one person full-time to lead their docs. The open source project is welcoming and inclusive, and it makes people want to be there. And as I said, because documentation is really just helping, think of all the places that you are in, whether they're discords or, or message boards, and people want to help. They want to contribute. And fixing a typo is an easy way to do that. Answering a question in a chat when you have the answer is a way to do that. And all this helping feeds into docs. And I think what we do super well at Astro is we make you realize that all these other ways that you are helping and want to help, it's all docs. And we find ways to pull you in. So and you'd be super surprised. Sometimes people show up in the Discord and they'll be like, this line of code in the docs is wrong. And now I'm inferring tone. You can't always tell tone in the Discord, but you just might have a flat statement like that. And so I hold my breath and I say, hey, we'd love a PR to fix that. If you have a moment, would you like to? And they go, oh, yes, I'd love to. So all these things, like it's helping. We don't distinguish sort of docs from the rest of the code, from support. It's just, you're there, you're helping, you've helped, and then I'm often on guard for how can I bring that into the docs. Oh, you said something cool and it's not in the docs. Would you like to add that line to the docs? Like, so just having someone who's constantly vigilant and looking for ways to give people tiny things they can do. And then it's like a spiral of success. So then they've made a PR, they fixed the doc. Now they know how to do it on their own. Now they know that it's welcome and it's appreciated. So there's that end. Then there's the other aspect of it. And if any of you come into the Astro Discord next Thursday, or early, come anytime. You are always welcome. When a first-time contributor makes a PR to AstroDocs, we have an automated bot that will display a congratulations message in our docs channel in Discord. Actually, it does it for every PR. Every PR, you are congratulated in docs. If it's a first-time contribution, and we know because we can see on GitHub that, oh, this was a first-time contributor. Our docs maintainers, our team, we know, oh, first-time contributor. When that congratulation message comes out, we reply to it. We have like we have like a standard wording for like rotating with the rotating lights. This first-time contributor alert, and then we welcome you by name, and we write a pun for you based on the title of your PR type, based on your PR title.
Wow.
Any first-time contributor gets this treatment, and some people are delighted, some people don't know what to make of it, but we are very congratulatory, we are very expressive, and we hope that these are the kinds of things that do encourage people to contribute.
That's amazing. Now I feel super motivated to go and get it. I love a good pun, so I'm excited to go and make my first contribution. Oh, I wanted to highlight a comment from Jennifer that I really love, which is, it's always amazing as a writer how much of your time is not spent writing.
Jennifer knows. Jennifer knows.
And you
Oh
know
my
what?
goodness.
And you know what? This really reminds me of writing software as well. This is something that I often teach newcomers is like, look, you think of like, somebody tippity tapping at their computer all day long. Very large portion of that is thinking. Yeah. Got a request from Arthur here, which is amazing talk. I'm having a lot of learning and insights in these slides. Would it be possible for you to share the
Yeah,
slides?
absolutely. I'll make sure you get them, Ramon, and you can distribute them to your participants. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And we got one more question from Rachel, which is, as a newcomer wanting to improve documentation, is it better to just create an issue or first discuss it in the community channel? What's your preferred approach?
It does depend. So one thing I will say about Astro in particular, we use Discord, and that is where all our support happens. That's where our community is. That's where all our chatter happens. But Discord is not available to everyone. It's there are some countries where it's difficult to access Discord. Our Discord is primarily English speaking, even though we do have language channels for the different translators to discuss translating. We say translate in your own language. So we recognize that both are valid. Um, sometimes, like sometimes it can feel like you drop an issue, and that's my inbox, right? It's like, who wants to go and open that issues tab and just see what are basically complaints, right? But honestly, sometimes that is the easiest way for the contributor to let us know something. And so we do understand that. As such a community-oriented project, I would say we prefer that you come into the Discord because the Discord is just so wonderful and the community is so wonderful. And you'll meet people. You'll just have like a great time there. So we prefer it because we like the slightly more instant banter and back and forth. But there's for most projects that have issues, as long as you're respectful in the issue, there is no problem using GitHub issues for projects that use that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I wanted to highlight comment from Laura saying, thanks for the fantastic talk, Sarah. So helpful and informative. And Hippo here said something that I really appreciated, which was that I can confirm that this thankfulness for contributions goes a very long way. Astro caught me like that. Just wanted to make a small docs remark, and now I'm a maintainer, which is amazing.
Yep, we'll get you. Careful.
Okay, so that's all the questions that have come in so far. If y'all have any more, I do have one question for you, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to know where, please, I could go to learn more about, for example, how as a maintainer I can make my docs as contributable as possible, if you have any, or generally any resources on documentation writing. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, that's a great question. I think that's one angle maybe I haven't looked at yet is for contributors, how to make your docs contributable. So interesting. Yes, I am happy to scrounge some of those things up. I have a couple of talks on YouTube. Most of them are they are geared more to project maintainers. So VConf last fall, I have a talk that is Stop Writing, Start Helping, that I think is really good for anyone who is in control of a project and maybe doesn't have writers at their disposal. And then I have a talk from a Write the Docs conference, which is Happy Maintainers, High Standards, Pick Two, because it's hard sometimes. You want to keep your quality high, but you also want happy contributors. So both of those talks have some ideas and strategies as well. That second talk I mentioned talks about how, as a maintainer, to handle these different kinds of contributions that you receive and how to channel the various kinds of enthusiasm and contributions that get thrown at you. So those are a couple of resources as well in talks that I've done before. But yeah, no, it's really interesting. Making your project contributable. Well, we like to think that Docs is a really good way. I mean, we took contributing.md to the next level because we want contributors to feel comfortable. And somewhat selfishly, we want contributors to do the things we want them to do. And as a project maintainer, that's my responsibility. It's my responsibility to tell you what I want from you. You can't be expected to guess. That's all on me.
Amazing. Thank you. I love, I was like scrambling to get links as well. Um, I found your VidConf talk. Would it be cool if I posted it into the chat if for folks who are curious?
Sure. While you're doing that, I still haven't had the YouTube window is minimized for me, so I haven't seen live chat. I've just been going off you here. I'm looking at you.
You're totally great. I also found the one you mentioned from Write the Docs Australia. Is that the correct one? Then I got that one. Posting that in the chat. And finally, contribute.docs.astro.build. That's Astro Docs. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. And if you just go to regular AstroDocs, we do have a page that's called Contribute, and there will be a link to Docs from there. We still call it Docs. When I was writing it on my own, it was my personal pet project, and it was like astrodocs.netfly.app. And so that's what we call it now. And we didn't want to change the name. We love the name.
It's a good name. It's a really good name. Well, I don't see any more questions coming into the chat, and I want to be like, you did such a good job with this presentation, and I want to be also give you some time in between to rest from that. So I wanted to give before I let all of us go and have a wonderful rest of our day and weekend. Is there anything that you might have wanted to mention or shout out that you didn't yet?
I mean, I think I've said this, but open source is all about contributing and contributions and helping. And I think it's great that everybody here wants to be involved, is getting involved in those kinds of projects. I hope none of it came off as sometimes too negative. I really did feel like you've got your course, you've got your program, you've got your curriculum here. You're going to learn how to write stuff. You're going to learn things. I thought that what I could do as a project maintainer is give you that insight a little bit from the other side, because I do want you to be successful and I want you contributing to these projects, and I want you doing so in a way that that delights the project maintainers as well. So a little bit of this was me trying to help you help the projects you want to contribute to.
I love that. Thank you so much. Then I have one more question for you, Sarah, which is if folks want to get in touch with you or reach out to you, what's the best place for them to do so?
So if you want to find me online, I'm in the Astro Discord. So that's just a great place to be in general. My website is rainsberger.ca. So my last name.ca, because I'm in Canada. That's a good place to find me as well. And I am also a little bit active on Mastodon, but all those places you can find from my website. You can also see a list of my talks and articles and stuff, both on my website and on my GitHub profile. So I'm Sarah11918 everywhere and also on GitHub. So my GitHub README has some extra links as well and places you can find me.
Amazing. Well, Sarah, this was an absolute joy. I cannot thank you enough. This was absolutely beyond what I could have hoped that we would have had in this almost 2 hours. I have one question from Arthur. Feel free to say no if you don't want to answer it. What does 11918 mean?
Okay, what's my degree in?
English?
What did I teach?
Was it math?
Mm-hmm. SARAH 11918.
Oh, that's amazing. I gotta go figure out what mine is, but I am gonna do that on another time.
Great question. Great question. I love answering it. But I mean, and that was like 25, 30 years ago. Now I have to say, so that also means I need the, you know, 8 digits is a bot, 5 digits, totally legit, real human.
Love it. Love it. Amazing. Well, folks, for who are tuning in or if you're watching the recording later on, thank you so much for joining and thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for contributing and having the interest to make open source a better place for us all. Sarah, thank you so much for this. It's been an absolute joy.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for hanging in for all this mess, and we
It's
got through
great.
it.
Awesome. Well, I will just ask all of you to please have a wonderful rest of your day, and a great start to your weekend. And I'll see you all next time. And we'll say bye for now.
All right.